To presidential politics here in the United States right now, Republican Senator Ted Cruz, he's out on the campaign trail this hour. He's under attack from so-called establishment Republicans within the last 48 hours alone. Former Senator and presidential candidate Bob Dole, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley, Iowa Governor Terry Branstad, they've all come out against Cruz. Our national correspondent, Sunlen Serfati, is on the campaign trail. She's with the senator in Manchester, New Hampshire right now. Sunlen, how is the Cruz campaign, the senator specifically, responding?
Well, it's really interesting. Well, Ted Cruz is really holding this up almost as a badge of honor, proudly, using this criticism from Republican establishment wing of the party, using that to really hold it up to prove and as evidence to voters. He says that he is the anti-establishment candidate, the one to choose from, as saying that this is a sign that the establishment is in full panic mode over his candidacy, and touting that this has really galvanized his supporters to donate money to his campaign. They've been fundraising over these attacks. It's a campaign touting they've raised $700,000 this week alone since this pile-on has started. But no doubt about it, this is where Ted Cruz finds his comfort, really directing fire at the establishment. But also, I do have to say, as we've been with him all week here in New Hampshire, it has managed to really knock him off his message. He's been having to respond to questions about this criticism rather than focus on framing his final message going into the Iowa caucuses and going into New Hampshire here. Wolf.
All right, Sunlen, thanks very much. The Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, he's struggling right now to break into the top tier of Republican primary candidates. With the Iowa caucuses just 11 days away, is time running out? Senator Paul is joining us right here, right now. Senator, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
First of all, I'm curious, your dad, the former Congressman Ron Paul, who you love, obviously, I've talked to him many times. He says your campaign may surprise everybody, but he also tells the Hill newspaper that it's realistic, his word realistic, that Donald Trump could be the Republican nominee. Is it realistic Donald Trump could be the Republican nominee?
It's kind of funny how things get misrepresented. They ask him, is it realistic? And he took it to mean, is it a possibility? And he said, sure, it's a possibility. But then he went on to say why he thought the polls were wrong and that we were really going to surprise people. So the internet's sort of like the circular game as a kid. You whisper from one to the next. By the time it's around the circle, everybody's like, oh, that's not what I meant to say at all.
In New Hampshire, according to our CNN WMUR poll, you're now tied with Christie and Kasich with 6%, but Donald Trump, he's at 34%. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think the polls are probably inaccurate. A lot of young people aren't polled. We haven't met a college student who's ever been polled. And we think our strength is with young people because I've been the leading advocate for saying the government shouldn't collect the phone records. I don't think the government should put our young people in jail for marijuana. And I also don't think our government ought to send young people to war back in the Middle East again. So I think we're going to get a lot of the youth vote, and it doesn't show up in polls necessarily.
Because in Iowa, these most recent polls, the CNN poll of polls shows Cruz and Trump almost in a dead heat in Iowa right now. You're together with a lot of others way down, but you don't think those polls are accurate in Iowa either?
One of the things they're underestimating is, my dad got over 20%. Most of the polls, when they ask who did you vote for in 2012, are way under 10% for him. So they're losing about half of the vote that he got in 2012. So I just don't think the polls are finding them. The polls also may be finding people who are angry but never show up at a caucus. Those might be Trump voters. So I think it's a mistake to prejudge this and say, oh, you know what, the election's over. I think it's still very fluid. The last Des Moines Register poll, over half the people in the poll were not yet certain who they were going to vote for.
Yeah, I think about at least a third, maybe a lot more in New Hampshire as well. They still haven't 100% made up their mind. Maybe 50% of the people are still on the fence. There's a notion that this race among the Republicans is a race between the so-called outsiders and the establishment. Where do you fit in?
Well, I've been running against the establishment ever since I got involved in politics. The establishment handpicked somebody who I was able to beat. I'm a physician. I've been a physician most of my career. Took time off from being a physician to try to straighten things out in Washington. But I think I would be one of the biggest opponents of the establishment that you probably have up here.
As you know, I assume you know, Monday night CNN is going to host a town hall in Iowa. Chris Cuomo will moderate, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Martin O'Malley. They'll all be interviewed by people. There'll be people at the town hall will ask questions. If you were one of those people at a town hall, what would you ask Hillary Clinton right now?
What I would ask Hillary Clinton is, why do you think that regime change in the Middle East, toppling Gaddafi, was a good idea when it seemed to make ISIS stronger? And why do you think the same for Syria? Why do you think toppling Assad in Syria will make us safer, when in reality I think it makes ISIS stronger?
Basically, the argument against you has been you're an isolationist, which you reject. You call yourself a non-interventionist, right?
What I would say is we have to look at our intervention and find out whether it's worked or not. I don't see any instance in the Middle East where our intervention has really worked. When we toppled Gaddafi, I think we got chaos in a failed state in Libya. When Mubarak left in Egypt, we got the Muslim Brotherhood. If we topple Assad, my fear is that we get ISIS. I think when we toppled Saddam Hussein, we made Iran stronger and we emboldened Iran. So I don't see any instance that really our intervention has worked. And it's not a question of never intervening, it's a question of more versus less. And I think considerably less.
It sounds like on these issues, you and Donald Trump aren't that far apart. You've studied his foreign policy.
Well, I'm not sure we can call it a foreign policy, but he said he was against the Iraq war, and he did after a while come out
against the Iraq war. He's been very critical of the U.S. position on Libya, the Iraq war, what's going on in Syria. He seems to say much of the same thing you're saying.
Sometimes. I don't think he has a consistent foreign policy, but I do think that he and Ted Cruz, who want to make the sand glow and want to do carpet bombing over there or bomb the heck out of them, I think that if you do indiscriminate bombing in the Middle East, you may well create more terrorists than you kill. I think we do have to kill our enemies, but if we're going to kill whole towns, as Ted Cruz has proposed or as Donald Trump has proposed, I think indiscriminate killing actually creates more terrorists than you kill. The
governor of Iowa, Terry Branstad, he says it would be a disaster, basically, for the Republicans if Ted Cruz were the nominee. He says, don't vote for Ted Cruz. He didn't endorse you or anyone else for that matter, but he says, don't vote for Ted Cruz. Who would be worse from your perspective as the Republican nominee, Cruz or Trump?
I think Ted Cruz's problem is one of authenticity right now. You know, for example, the Liberty voters, the people who we like and like us, they don't want the NSA collecting all the phone records. But Ted Cruz says, oh, well, I voted for reform, but I voted for the reform so the government could collect 100% of your cell phone records. Our people pause at that and say, my goodness, is he trying to have it both ways? He says he's for reforming the NSA, and in the same breath he says he wants the NSA to collect 100% of your cell phone records. That kind of leap back and forth or trying to have it both ways really we think is probably Cruz's biggest problem right now.
So from your libertarian perspective, who is worse, Trump or Cruz?
I can tell you who's best, and that would be my candidacy.
I know you think you're best, but who would be worse for the Republicans? You're an honest guy. Be blunt.
I don't think it's probably instructive. I do worry a little bit more about Donald Trump, and the main reason I do is that I believe that he wants more power to come to him, and he'll take care of us all if we just give him power. But I'm part of a limited government tradition that says, you know what, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and we ought to be very, very careful about giving up power. I want to devolve power back to the states and the people, and there's a long-standing conservative/libertarian tradition of that, and I'm more than willing to hold that up against what Trump wants, because I think what Trump wants is bad for America.
As far as the Iran nuclear deal is concerned, it's now being implemented. You voted against it, but Americans have been released, I think, as part of that Iran nuclear deal. They're on their way home. Saeed Abedini, Amir Hekmati. You're happy that these Americans are coming home. Are you happy this Iran nuclear deal is now being implemented right now, given a chance?
If Iran adheres to the deal, it will be a great thing, because the deal actually prescribes them getting rid of their nuclear program, not making, enriching uranium that could be used for weaponization. The question always has been, in my mind and others, will they adhere to the agreement? I would have preferred more leverage to hold over them to enforce their compliance, keeping the sanctions on over a longer period of time. Now that it's a done deal, though, if they adhere to it, it's still a good thing. The question is, are they adhering now because they have the carrot of the money, or will they continue to adhere when we're 6 months out or a year out from now?
Senator Rand Paul, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You have to do how well, by the way, in Iowa and New Hampshire, otherwise you'll drop out. Give us an answer.
We're in it to win it. I grew up as an athlete. When we go into a swimming meet, you don't go into a swimming meet and say, I'm going to get third, maybe fourth, maybe sixth. We're in it to win it, and we're going to shock a lot of people.
Okay. Senator, thanks very much for joining us. Coming up, Hillary Clinton campaigning in Iowa while Donald Trump heads to Vegas.